The laughter cut through me like broken glass. Troy had just called my 18 months of work a cute little hobby, and my parents were laughing along with him. I sat there at that overpriced Italian restaurant, watching my sister Jenna beam at her boyfriend, while my dad told me to stop making a scene. It was her birthday dinner, after all. So I went quiet, let them talk. Then Troy mentioned his firm's new project launching next quarter. I kept my voice calm when I asked, "Interesting. That's built on adaptive neural mapping, right?" His confident smile froze completely. The silence that followed my question lasted maybe 3 seconds, but it felt like an hour. I watched Troy's face cycle through confusion, then alarm, then forced recovery. He laughed, but it sounded hollow. "Someone's been reading TechCrunch," he said, reaching for his wine glass. But I'd seen it. That flicker of recognition. That moment of genuine concern before his corporate mask slipped back into place. I'm Harley, and I've spent my entire 28 years being the disappointment of the Patterson family. Growing up in suburban Connecticut, in a big colonial house in Greenwich, with perfectly trimmed hedges and a 3-car garage, you'd think I had it made. But success in my family wasn't measured by happiness or passion. It was measured by prestige, by titles, by the kind of job you could brag about at the country club. My sister Jenna was 3 years younger than me, but she'd always been 3 steps ahead. Captain of the debate team in high school, early admission to Yale, graduated summa cum laude, with a degree in political science, now working as a corporate lawyer at one of those firms with too many names in the title. She wore power suits and won cases, and made my parents swell with pride at every family gathering. Me? I went to the state university, not because I couldn't get in anywhere else, but because they had a solid computer science program and I'd already known by 17 that I wanted to build things with code. I graduated with honors, spent 5 years working at 2 different tech companies, learning everything I could about software architecture, user experience, and what made digital products actually useful for real people. Then, 18 months ago, I quit my stable job with benefits and a decent salary to work on something that mattered to me. An AI-powered resource allocation system designed specifically for small businesses. The kind of mom-and-pop shops and local companies that couldn't afford enterprise software but desperately needed help, managing inventory, scheduling, and resources. I called it Streamline. My parents acted like I'd announced I was joining a circus. "You had stability," my dad Robert said, his executive voice coming out, the same tone he used in his corner office at the insurance company where he'd worked for 30 years. "Benefits, a retirement plan. Why would you throw that away?" My mom Diane, who sold high-end real estate and measured success in commission checks, just shook her head. Jenna would never do something so irresponsible. And there it was, the comparison that had followed me my entire life. So when Jenna met Troy 8 months ago at some corporate mixer, and he turned out to be everything my parents had ever wanted in a son, I knew I'd slipped even further down the family ladder. Troy Brennan, 30 years old, senior solutions architect at Vertex Solutions, one of the major players in enterprise software. He drove a black BMW, wore suits that cost more than my monthly rent, and had the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. My parents loved him instantly. Tonight was supposed to be just family celebrating Jenna's 26th birthday, but she'd insisted Troy come, and here we were in a private dining room at Milano's, the kind of place where the menu doesn't list prices, and the waiters refill your water after every sip. Troy had been holding court all evening, telling stories about big deals and important clients. My parents hung on every word. Then he'd turned his attention to me, asked what I'd been up to with that friendly condescension that made my teeth hurt. I'd tried to explain Streamline, the work I'd been doing, the potential I saw in the market. That's when he'd laughed and called it a cute little hobby. My dad had actually chuckled. My mom had smiled and patted Troy's arm like he'd said something clever. "Stop making a scene," my dad had said when I'd tried to continue. "It's your sister's night." So I'd swallowed my words in my pride, nodded, picked up my fork. Then Troy had pivoted back to talking about himself, about Vertex's exciting new initiative. "We're launching an AI optimization project next quarter," he'd said, his chest puffing slightly. "Really revolutionary stuff. Going to completely change how small and medium businesses handle operations." That's when something cold had settled in my stomach. Small and medium businesses, operations management, AI optimization. The words I'd used to describe Streamline at a tech meetup 16 months ago. So, I'd asked my question about adaptive neural mapping, one of the key technical components I'd developed for my system, and I'd watched Troy's smile freeze. Now, as appetizers arrived and conversation moved to safer topics, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just stumbled onto something much bigger than a family dinner gone wrong. The rest of dinner passed in a blur. I barely tasted the osso buco I'd ordered, too busy watching Troy from the corner of my eye. He'd recovered from my question, but something had shifted. He kept glancing at me when he thought I wasn't looking, and when our eyes met, he'd look away quickly. My dad ordered a second bottle of wine, the expensive kind he only got when he was really celebrating. The conversation turned to wedding planning. Jenna and Troy had gotten engaged 3 months ago, a surprise proposal on a beach in the Hamptons that my mom had described in excruciating detail at least a dozen times. "We're thinking next June," Jenna said, her engagement ring catching the candlelight. The diamond was enormous, the kind of ring that made a statement. "Outdoor ceremony, maybe at the vineyard in Napa we went to last summer." "That sounds beautiful, honey," my mom said, already pulling out her phone to show me pictures I'd already seen. "Troy's been so generous with the planning budget." Troy smiled modestly. "Only the best for Jenna." I felt sick. "Harley, you'll be in the wedding party, of course," Jenna said, and it sounded more like an obligation than an invitation. "Troy's brother is the best man, but we need groomsmen." "Sure," I said, because what else could I say? Troy launched into another story, this time about Vertex's corporate culture and their innovation labs. He described their development process in those vague, buzzword-heavy terms that corporate types love. Agile methodology, synergistic integration, disruptive solutions. But I'd spent 5 years in tech companies. I knew how to read between the corporate speak, and the more Troy talked about Vertex's SMB suite, the more my stomach churned. "When exactly did you start developing this project?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Troy barely paused. "Development started last year. April or May, I think. Been about 14 months of intense work." April or May. 14 months ago. I'd presented Streamline at the Tech Innovators Meetup on April 18th of last year. 16 months ago. "That's a pretty aggressive timeline for an AI system," I said. "We have the resources," Troy replied, and there was an edge to his voice now. "When you have a team of 20 developers and proper funding, you can move fast." "Must be nice," I said. "It is," Troy said, meeting my eyes directly. "That's the difference between a professional operation and a solo hobbyist. Scale, resources, execution." My dad nodded along like Troy was delivering profound wisdom. My mom beamed at him. Jenna reached over and squeezed Troy's hand. "He's been working so hard on this project. Some nights he doesn't get home until 10 or 11. Building something great takes sacrifice," Troy said, and the way he looked at me made it clear he didn't think I understood sacrifice. But I did. I understood working alone in a tiny apartment, surviving on ramen and coffee, coding until my eyes burned. I understood maxing out credit cards and draining savings accounts, because I believed in something. I understood sacrifice. What I was beginning to understand now was theft. Dessert arrived. Tiramisu for the table, and a special chocolate cake for Jenna with 26 candles. We sang Happy Birthday. She blew out the candles, made a wish. I wondered if she wished for me to be more like Troy. Coffee came. The check came. My dad grabbed it before anyone else could, made a show of pulling out his platinum credit card. "My treat," he said. "Any dinner with my future son-in-law is worth celebrating." Future son-in-law. The words stung more than they should have. We said our goodbyes in the parking lot. The September air was crisp, fall coming early this year. Troy shook my hand with that firm grip guys like him practice. "Good seeing you, Harley. Maybe we can grab lunch sometime. Talk about getting you back into the job market." "Maybe," I said, knowing I'd rather eat glass. Jenna hugged me, but it was perfunctory. "Try to be happy for me," she whispered, and I realized she thought I was jealous. Jealous of Troy, of her relationship, of her perfect life. She had no idea. I drove home to my one-bedroom apartment in Stamford, a 30-minute drive from my parents' house in Greenwich, but a world away in terms of real estate values. My place was small, but I'd made it work. One bedroom that doubled as my office, a kitchen barely big enough for one person, a living room with a couch I'd bought secondhand and a coffee table covered in coding books and empty coffee mugs. It was nearly 11 when I got home, but I was wired. I couldn't stop thinking about the timeline, the coincidences. I opened my laptop at the kitchen table and started searching. Vertex Solutions had a polished website with all the corporate hallmarks. Mission statement about innovation and excellence. Photos of their modern office space with standing desks and beanbag chairs. Team page with headshots of executives. There was Troy, smiling in a blue button-down. Senior Solutions Architect. 5 years with the company. I dug deeper, searching for information about their SMB project. Found press releases from tech blogs, all published in the last 6 months. Vertex Solutions announces new small business initiative. Enterprise software. Giant targets. SMB market. Vertex unveils AI-powered operations suite. The descriptions were vague but familiar. Resource allocation. Predictive inventory management. Automated scheduling. Integrated platform designed for businesses with 50 to 500 employees. Everything I'd built into Streamline. My hands were shaking as I opened my email and searched for the Tech Innovators meetup from April of last year. Found the confirmation email, clicked the link to the attendee list, and there it was. Troy Brennan, Senior Solutions Architect, Vertex Solutions. He'd been there. He'd seen my presentation. I couldn't breathe right. Couldn't think straight. Troy had been at that meetup. He'd seen everything. I pulled up the presentation slides I'd used that night, stored in a folder on my laptop labeled Streamline Pitch April 2023. Clicked through them, remembering how nervous I'd been. It was my first time presenting to a group bigger than my 2 friends who coded with me sometimes. Slide 1. The problem. Small businesses struggling with resource management using outdated systems or pen and paper. Slide 2. The solution. An integrated AI platform that learned from business patterns and optimized operations automatically. Slide 3. The architecture. This was the detailed one, showing the technical framework. Adaptive neural mapping for pattern recognition. Predictive algorithms for inventory. Automated scheduling based on historical data and real-time inputs. Slide 4. Target market. Businesses with annual revenue between $500,000 and $10 million. The sweet spot where they needed sophisticated tools but couldn't afford enterprise solutions. Slide 5. Business model. Subscription-based, tiered pricing, pay as you grow. Slides 6 through 8. Beta results from the 3 local businesses I'd been testing with. Real data showing efficiency improvements and cost savings. I'd shown everything. The concept, the technical approach, the market strategy. I'd been so focused on getting feedback, on finding potential investors or partners, that I hadn't thought about protecting myself. I pulled up Vertex's product page, compared it to my slides. The interface screenshots they'd published looked eerily similar to my mock-ups. Same layout philosophy. Same color scheme even. Same approach to data visualization. This wasn't parallel development. This was copying. But could I prove it? I had timestamped files on my computer. I had my GitHub repository showing commits going back 18 months. I had emails with the beta test businesses. What I didn't have was a patent. No trademark. No formal intellectual property protection. I'd been too broke and too focused on building to hire a lawyer. I checked the dates again. My presentation, April 18th, 2023. Vertex's public announcement of their SMB initiative, June 7th, 2023. Less than 2 months later. Then I did something I probably shouldn't have. I went to social media and looked up when Troy and Jenna had started dating. Their first photo together was posted in mid-July of last year. A casual coffee date picture Jenna had posted with the caption, New Adventures, July. 3 months after the meetup where Troy saw my presentation. 3 months after he learned I existed, learned what I was building, a terrible thought crept into my mind. Had Troy sought out Jenna intentionally? Had he learned she was my sister and decided to get close to our family to keep tabs on me? To make sure I wasn't a threat? No. That was paranoid. That was too calculated. But was it? I spiraled down a research rabbit hole. Found more articles about Vertex's product. Discovered a tech blog that had gotten early access and posted detailed screenshots. I compared them frame by frame to my designs. The similarity was damning. But who would believe me? A guy working alone in his apartment versus a major corporation with lawyers and PR teams? My own family didn't even respect my work. Why would anyone else? I found myself thinking about all the times Troy had asked casual questions about Streamline over the past months. At family dinners, at Jenna's birthday party last year, at Thanksgiving. How's the coding going? Made any progress? Found any investors yet? I thought he was being polite, making conversation. Now I wondered if he'd been gathering intelligence. At 2 in the morning, I opened a document and started writing everything down. Dates, evidence, timeline. Built a case like I was preparing for court, even though I had no intention of going to court. I couldn't afford lawyers. Vertex would bury me in legal fees. At 3, I took screenshots of everything. My original files, Vertex's product pages, the meetup attendee list, the dates, organized them into folders. At 4, I finally fell asleep at my kitchen table, my head on my folded arms, the laptop still glowing in the dark. I woke up at 8 with a stiff neck and a bitter taste in my mouth. Made coffee, stared at my evidence folders, tried to figure out what to do. Option 1. Confront Troy directly. But what would that accomplish? He'd deny everything, and I'd look like a conspiracy theorist. Option 2. Talk to my family. But they'd never believe me over him. They'd think I was jealous, acting out. Option 3. Contact a lawyer. With what money? Option 4. Do nothing. Let Vertex launch their product, watch them succeed with my ideas, and swallow the injustice. The thought of option 4 made me want to punch a wall. I spent the next 3 days barely functioning. Went through the motions of working on Streamline, but my heart wasn't in it. Kept checking news sites for updates about Vertex. Read articles about intellectual property theft in the tech industry. Found stories about small developers getting crushed by bigger companies. It happened all the time, apparently. David versus Goliath. Except Goliath won in the real world. On Thursday afternoon, I got a text from Jenna. Family dinner Sunday at Mom and Dad's. Troy's parents coming too. Big announcement. I stared at the message for a long time. Considered making an excuse, claiming I was sick. But I knew that would just create more drama, more proof in my family's eyes that I was immature and irresponsible. So I texted back, I'll be there. Spent the rest of the week preparing. Not preparing what to wear or what to bring, preparing my evidence. Printing out documentation, making sure I had everything organized on my phone. If they were going to make me sit through another dinner celebrating Troy, I was going to at least have the truth on my side, even if nobody wanted to hear it. Sunday arrived too quickly. I drove to Greenwich in my old Toyota, a contrast to the luxury cars that would fill my parents' circular driveway. The house looked perfect as always, the lawn manicured, the shutters freshly painted. My mom took pride in appearances. I parked on the street, walked up the brick pathway, rang the doorbell even though I'd grown up here. It didn't feel like home anymore. My mom opened the door, already dressed in her hosting outfit, a cream-colored pantsuit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Harley, you're early. Good. You can help your father with the wine. No hello, no hug. Just a task. Inside, the house smelled like roasted chicken and fresh bread. The dining room table was set for 12 with the good china, the kind we only used for special occasions. Crystal glasses. Cloth napkins folded into shapes. Troy's parents arrived at 6. Gerald and Patricia Brennan swept in like they owned the place, all perfect smiles and firm handshakes. Gerald was a corporate attorney. Patricia did something with philanthropy and charity boards. They wore wealth casually, the way people do when they've never known anything else. You must be Harley, Patricia said, gripping my hand with surprising strength. Troy's told us so much about you. I wondered what version of me Troy had described. My Aunt Susan and Uncle Frank came next. Then my cousin Melissa with her husband. 12 people crowding into the dining room, making small talk over wine and cheese. Troy held court, of course. Told a story about negotiating a major client contract, had everyone laughing. He had that gift, making himself the center of any room without seeming to try. We sat down for dinner. I ended up between Aunt Susan and Uncle Frank, across from Troy's parents. Jenna and Troy sat at one end of the table near my mom and dad, clearly the guests of honor. The first course came out. My mom had hired a catering service, determined to impress. Salads with candied pecans and goat cheese, arranged artfully on white plates. Conversation flowed around me. Stock market talk, real estate market speculation, gossip about neighbors. I ate and stayed quiet, counting minutes. Then, after the main course, Troy stood up, clinked his wine glass with a fork. The room went silent. "Thank you all for coming tonight," he said, and he had that practiced public speaking voice, confident and clear. "Jenna and I wanted to share some exciting news with all of you together." I braced myself. "As you know, we've been planning our wedding for next June," Troy continued. Jenna stood up beside him, beaming. "But we've decided to move the date up to December." Gasps around the table. My mom's hand flew to her chest in theatrical delight. "I just got promoted to Vice President of Product Development at Vertex," Troy said, letting the announcement land. "And with everything happening at work, we want to celebrate our future together sooner rather than later. So, December 23rd, we'd love for all of you to be there." Applause broke out. My dad stood up to shake Troy's hand. My mom was already crying happy tears. Aunt Susan started asking questions about venues and dresses. Troy's father Gerald stood, raised his glass. "A toast," he said, and everyone grabbed their wine. "To my son, who has worked incredibly hard to get where he is." The Vertex SMB project was entirely his vision, his leadership. He conceptualized it, pitched it to the board, and led the development from the ground up. Now this promotion is the recognition he deserves. To Troy and Jenna. To Troy and Jenna, everyone echoed. I didn't drink. Couldn't. The words conceptualized from the ground up were ringing in my ears like alarm bells. The conversation continued. Everyone talking about the wedding, the promotion, how successful Troy was. I felt like I was underwater. Sounds muffled and distant. Then my mom turned to me. I saw it coming but couldn't stop it. "Harley, honey," she said, loud enough for the table to hear, "maybe Troy could help you find a real job at Vertex, since your little project isn't really going anywhere?" Laughter rippled around the table. Kind laughter, they'd say. Concerned laughter. Troy looked at me, and there was something in his eyes. Challenge, maybe. Or warning. "Actually, Mrs. Patterson," he said, his voice dripping with false generosity, "we are hiring. I could definitely get Harley an interview for a junior developer position. Entry level, but it comes with good benefits. Stable income, structure and guidance. Junior developer. Entry level." The condescension was suffocating. My Aunt Susan chimed in. "That's so generous of you, Troy. Harley really could use some direction, couldn't you, honey?" All eyes on me, waiting for me to be grateful, waiting for me to thank Troy for offering me scraps. Something inside me snapped. I pulled out my phone, opened the folder I'd prepared. "Troy," I said, my voice calmer than I felt. "I have a question about your SMB project. When exactly did you conceptualize it?" The shift in the room was immediate, tension replacing celebration. Troy's smile tightened. "We started development last year, April or May, I think." "Why?" "Interesting," I said, turning my phone so my dad could see the screen. "Because I presented this exact concept at the Tech Innovators Meetup on April 18th, 2023. You were there. Your name is on the attendee list." I swiped to show the list, Troy's name highlighted. The room went dead silent. "Harley," my dad said, warning in his voice. "A lot of people work on similar ideas," Troy said quickly. "AI for small business isn't exactly revolutionary. It's a common space." "Then why?" I said, swiping to comparison screenshots. "Does your interface match my mock-ups? Why does your architecture mirror mine? Why did Vertex announce this project 8 weeks after my presentation?" I held up my phone, showed the side-by-side images. My designs from April 2023. Vertex's product screenshots from their press release. My sister stared at me like I'd lost my mind. "Harley, stop. You're ruining everything." "This is completely inappropriate," my dad said, standing up. "Troy is a respected professional, and you're making wild accusations." Troy's father Gerald stood too, his face red. "Are you accusing my son of theft? Because we have lawyers, young man. This is defamation." "I'm showing facts," I said. "Dates, evidence, documentation." Troy held up his hands, playing the reasonable victim. "Look, Harley, I understand you're frustrated. Your project hasn't taken off the way you hoped. But this is embarrassing for you. Even if there are similarities, and I'm not saying there are, Vertex has resources, legal teams, development budgets. IP protection. Even if you had an idea first, we have the ability to execute it properly. The implication hung in the air. Even if I was right, it didn't matter. They had power. I didn't. You stole my work, I said quietly. I built a successful product. Troy shot back. That's what professionals do. My mom was crying now, upset tears instead of happy ones. How could you do this? She asked me. On their special night? How could I? I repeated, incredulous. How could he? But nobody was listening. Jenna was comforting Troy. My dad was apologizing to Gerald and Patricia. Aunt Susan was shaking her head in disappointment. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. I'm leaving, I said. Harley James Patterson, my mom started, using my full name like I was 10 years old. I'm done, I said. Enjoy your celebration. I walked out. Nobody followed me. Drove home with my hands shaking so hard I had to pull over twice. Sat in my apartment in the dark, feeling like my entire world had just collapsed. My phone buzzed with texts. Jenna, I can't believe you. You're so selfish. My dad, we'll talk about this later when you're calm. My mom, you owe Troy an apology. Not one person asked if I was okay. Not one person considered I might be telling the truth. I turned off my phone and sat in the silence, wondering if fighting back had been worth it. I drove for an hour with no destination in mind, just needing to move, to escape the feeling of being trapped. Ended up at a 24-hour diner on the edge of Stamford, the kind of place with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that tasted like it had been sitting on the burner since breakfast. It was nearly 11 at night. The diner was mostly empty. Just a couple of truck drivers at the counter and an older woman in the corner working on a laptop. I slid into a booth by the window, ordered coffee from a tired waitress who looked like she'd heard every story there was to hear. I stared at my phone, still turned off on the table. Thought about turning it back on, then decided against it. Whatever messages were waiting could wait. The coffee came, burned, and bitter. I drank it anyway. At 11:47, my laptop in my bag vibrated with an email notification. I'd left the laptop on, had forgotten about it, almost ignored it, but something made me pull it out. Unknown sender. Subject line, we need to talk. I opened it. I was at that dinner tonight. We need to talk. A friend. My first thought was spam. My second thought was worse, that someone from my family was messing with me. But the timestamp was only 10 minutes ago. I hit reply. Typed, "Who is this?" The response came back within 2 minutes. Just a phone number and 5 words. Call me. It's about Troy. I stared at the number for a long time. This could be anything. A prank. A trap. Someone from Vertex trying to intimidate me. But I was already at the bottom. What did I have to lose? I called from the diner parking lot, standing under a flickering streetlight next to my car. A woman answered on the second ring. Thank you for calling. Her voice was professional, controlled. My name is Lauren Hayes. I'm an investigative journalist with the Financial Chronicle. The Financial Chronicle. That was a major business publication, the kind that broke stories about corporate fraud and industry scandals. How did you get my email? I asked. I was at your parents' house tonight, Lauren said. I was there as Melissa's +1. Your cousin brought me. Melissa, my cousin. I tried to remember if I'd even spoken to her tonight. Why were you there? Because I've been investigating Vertex Solutions for the past 6 months, Lauren said. And what happened at dinner tonight confirms everything I've been looking into. My heart started pounding. What do you mean, investigating? Can we meet? Lauren asked. Tomorrow morning? I'll explain everything, but I'd rather do it in person. And I'd like to see the evidence you mentioned at dinner. I should have been more careful. Should have asked more questions. But I was desperate and angry and tired of fighting alone. There's a coffee shop on Main Street in Stamford, I said. Cooper's Coffee. 9 tomorrow morning? I'll be there, Lauren said. And Harley? What you did tonight took courage. Don't let them make you doubt yourself. She hung up before I could respond. I didn't sleep much that night. Kept thinking about Lauren, about journalists, about what it meant that someone had been investigating Vertex. Wondered if I was walking into something worse than I already had. But at 9 the next morning, I was at Cooper's Coffee with my laptop and a folder of printed documentation. Lauren Hayes arrived exactly on time. She was in her mid-30s, dressed in business casual, with sharp eyes that took in everything. She ordered a black coffee, sat down across from me, and got straight to business. "I've been covering the tech industry for 12 years, she said, pulling out her own laptop. 6 months ago, I got a tip about Vertex Solutions. A developer from Seattle claimed they'd stolen his concept for a logistics optimization platform. He'd presented it at a tech conference. Someone from Vertex was in attendance. And 6 months later, Vertex launched a nearly identical product. What happened to him? I asked. Vertex offered him a settlement with an NDA attached, Lauren said. He took it because he couldn't afford to fight them in court. But he contacted me first, off the record. Pointed me toward other developers who'd had similar experiences. She opened a document on her laptop, turned it so I could see. A list of names, dates, descriptions of products. 5 different developers, 5 different projects, all allegedly copied by Vertex. They have a pattern, Lauren said. They send people to tech meetups, conferences, pitch competitions, anywhere independent developers are showing their work. They identify promising concepts, then either acquire the company for pennies on the dollar or just copy the technology outright. Small developers can't afford the legal fight, so Vertex gets away with it. How are they not in jail? I asked. Because they're smart about it, Lauren said. They change just enough to claim it's their own work. They have lawyers who can argue parallel development. And they have the resources to drag out litigation until the other side runs out of money. Most cases settle quietly. So what do you want from me? I asked. Lauren looked me straight in the eye. I want you to go on record. I have sources who'll talk off the record, but I need someone willing to attach their name to this story. Someone with clear documentation and a compelling case. You have time-stamped files, presentation materials, a witness list from that meetup. You have the personal angle with your sister. It's a story people will pay attention to. If I do this, I said slowly, my family will never forgive me. They don't believe you anyway, Lauren said, not unkindly. At least this way, the truth gets out there. At least other developers will know to protect themselves. She was right. My family had already chosen Troy over me. My sister thought I was jealous. My parents thought I was making scenes. I'd lost them already. What do you need? I asked. Everything you have, Lauren said. Documentation, emails, files. I'll verify it all, cross-reference the dates, interview other attendees from that meetup if possible. I'll reach out to the other developers I've been talking to, see if your case gives them courage to come forward too. Then I'll write the story. How long? I asked. 2 weeks, Lauren said. Maybe 3. I need to be thorough, make sure everything's airtight. Vertex will come after us legally if there's any hole in the story. I thought about what that meant. 2 weeks of waiting, wondering. 2 weeks of my family getting deeper into wedding planning with Troy. 2 weeks of carrying this weight. But also 2 weeks of someone finally believing me. 2 weeks of building toward justice instead of just sitting in anger. I pushed my laptop across the table. It's all yours. Lauren spent the next hour reviewing my files, asking detailed questions, taking notes. She was thorough, professional, didn't make promises she couldn't keep. This is solid, she finally said. Really solid. The timeline is damning. And if I can get confirmation from other meetup attendees that Troy was there and saw your presentation, it's even stronger. What happens when you publish? I asked. Vertex will deny it, Lauren said. They'll threaten legal action. But if the story's strong enough, if I have multiple sources and clear evidence, it'll create pressure. Media attention, public scrutiny. Sometimes that's enough to force change. And Troy? I asked. If he's responsible for stealing IP, and if I can prove it, his career at Vertex is probably over, Lauren said. Companies don't like employees who create legal liability. The thought should have made me happy. Instead, I just felt tired. He's marrying my sister in 3 months, I said. I know, Lauren said. I'm sorry. But the truth matters more than keeping the peace. I wasn't sure I believed that anymore. But I nodded anyway. Over the next 2 weeks, my phone exploded with messages from my family. Angry texts from Jenna calling me jealous and pathetic. Long voicemails from my mom asking how I could be so cruel. Formal, disappointed messages from my dad saying I was no longer welcome at family events until I apologized to Troy. Troy's lawyers sent a cease and desist letter, threatening a defamation lawsuit if I continued to make false and damaging claims. I forwarded it to Lauren. I also got a few supportive messages. A developer I'd met at that original meetup reached out, said he remembered Troy being there, remembered him asking a lot of questions about my presentation. Another person from the meetup said the same thing. Lauren interviewed them both. Meanwhile, I threw myself into Streamline, working 16-hour days. If Vertex was going to launch their stolen version, I was going to make sure mine was better. Reached out to more small businesses, offered free trials, gathered feedback. The work kept me sane, gave me purpose when everything else felt like it was falling apart. On a Friday morning, 2 weeks after that disastrous dinner, Lauren texted me. Article goes live Monday, 6 a.m. Be ready. I spent the weekend in a state of anxious anticipation. Barely ate. Couldn't focus. Kept imagining how my family would react. What Troy would do. Whether this would make anything better or just make everything worse. Sunday night. I set my alarm for 5:45. Monday morning, I was awake before the alarm, sitting at my kitchen table with coffee and my laptop open. At 6 a.m. exactly, I refreshed Lauren's publication's website, and there it was. The headline sat at the top of the Financial Chronicle's homepage. Vertex Solutions, a pattern of innovation theft? Below it, in smaller text, multiple developers allege the enterprise software giant systematically copies ideas from independent creators. I clicked through, started reading. Lauren had written over 4,000 words, meticulously documented, devastating in its detail. The article opened with my story, my name, my photo that Lauren had taken when we met, my description of creating Streamline and presenting it at the Tech Innovators Meetup. The timeline laid out clearly, my presentation in April 2023, Troy Brennan's confirmed attendance, Vertex's announcement 8 weeks later. Side-by-side screenshots of my interface mock-ups and Vertex's product. The similarities were impossible to deny. Then Lauren expanded to the other cases. 4 more developers, 4 more projects, all following the same pattern. Tech meetups and conferences. Vertex employees in attendance. Projects launched within months that bore suspicious resemblance to what independent developers had shown. 3 of the developers were quoted by name. 2 others remained anonymous but provided documentation. All of them had been offered settlements with non-disclosure agreements. None of them had the resources to fight Vertex in court. Lauren quoted legal experts about intellectual property law, about how difficult it is for independent developers to protect their work. She included statements from other tech companies about the importance of ethical innovation. And she named Troy specifically as the point person on the SMB project that mirrored my work. I read the whole article twice, my coffee going cold beside me. It was thorough. It was fair. It was absolutely damning. By 7 a.m., the article had been shared 300 times on social media. By 8, tech blogs were picking it up, writing their own summaries. By 9, it was trending. My phone started buzzing with notifications, messages from people I'd gone to college with, former coworkers, other developers I'd met over the years. Most were supportive. Some asked questions. A few accused me of sour grapes. By noon, Vertex's stock had dropped 3%. At 2 p.m., Vertex released an official statement. We categorically deny these baseless allegations. Vertex Solutions takes intellectual property rights seriously and has never knowingly infringed on another party's work. We are reviewing potential legal action against the Financial Chronicle and those involved in these false claims. The statement made things worse. Within an hour, journalists were questioning why Vertex was threatening legal action instead of addressing the specific allegations. More people were sharing the article. Discussion forums were analyzing the evidence. By Wednesday, one of Vertex's major clients, a national retail chain, announced they were reviewing their partnership and evaluating their options. I watched it all unfold from my apartment, barely able to process it. This thing I'd started at a family dinner had become a national business story. Thursday afternoon, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Harley. Troy's voice, tight with anger. You destroyed my career. My promotion is on hold. The board is conducting an internal investigation. Jenna won't even talk to me. You stole my work, I said, surprised by how calm I sounded. You used my sister. You tried to humiliate me. What did you expect? It's just business, Troy said, and I could hear him trying to justify it to himself. Everyone copies everyone in tech. You're just mad because I did it better. Because I had the resources to execute. No, I said. I'm mad because you're a thief. There's a difference between inspiration and theft, Troy. You knew it, and you did it anyway. You'll never work in tech again, Troy said. I'll make sure of it. My father's firm will bury you in legal fees. You'll spend the next decade paying off debt. Maybe, I said, but everyone will know what you did. That's worth something. I hung up before he could respond. The next morning, I received an email from an unfamiliar address. The subject line read, Investment Opportunity? It was from a venture capital firm in Boston. They'd read the Financial Chronicle article, looked into Streamline, been impressed by my documentation and my product. They wanted to schedule a call to discuss potential funding. I stared at the email for a long time before responding. The call happened that afternoon. 3 partners from the VC firm, asking smart questions about my technology, my market research, my business model. They'd done their homework, knew exactly what Streamline could do. We like your story, one of them said. The David versus Goliath angle is compelling. And frankly, the publicity from this Vertex situation has given you more visibility than most startups get in their first year. So you're interested in the drama, not the product? I asked. We're interested in both, another partner said. The product is solid. The drama just means people will pay attention when you launch. Over the next week, I took meetings with 2 other VC firms. All of them had read the article. All of them saw opportunity. One firm offered me $800,000 in seed funding. Not a fortune, but enough to hire a small team, accelerate development, actually compete in the market. I accepted on a Tuesday afternoon in mid-November, sitting in my apartment, barely believing it was real. With funding secured, I hired 3 developers and 1 operations person. Rented a small office space in a shared workspace in Stamford. Started working on Streamline full-time, with actual resources behind me. The beta version I'd been testing with 3 businesses expanded to 20. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Small business owners loved the interface, the affordability, the way it actually solved their problems. Meanwhile, Vertex was hemorrhaging credibility. A second major publication ran a follow-up story, interviewing more developers who'd had similar experiences. The pattern was undeniable. 2 of the developers from Lauren's original article filed lawsuits. Others were considering it. Vertex's stock continued to slide. Their holiday sales projections were revised downward. Industry analysts were questioning their long-term viability. In mid-November, Streamline officially launched out of beta. I'd built a simple website, written clear documentation, set up a customer service system. It wasn't fancy, but it worked. The Financial Chronicle did a follow-up piece. Developer at center of Vertex scandal launches competing product. More publicity, more sign-ups. Within 3 weeks, Streamline had 200 paying customers. Revenue was modest but growing steadily, $10,000 a month and climbing. I wasn't rich, but I was sustainable, and I was proving that my idea worked, that I could execute just as well as Vertex. Maybe better, because I actually cared about serving my customers instead of just maximizing profit. In early December, I checked the news out of habit and saw a headline. Vertex Solutions settles multiple IP theft claims, implements new ethics protocols. I clicked through, read the article. Vertex had agreed to pay undisclosed settlements to 4 developers, including me. They'd issued a public statement acknowledging lapses in internal processes and promising reforms. They were implementing new procedures for how employees engaged with external innovation. The settlement money came 2 weeks later. Not enough to retire, but enough to pay off my credit cards, build up a cushion, invest back into Streamline. And Troy? His name no longer appeared on Vertex's website. According to my quiet research, he'd left the company. No official announcement, just a silent departure. Around December 15th, I got a text from Jenna. Just 4 words. We need to talk. We met at the same coffee shop where I'd first spoken with Lauren. Jenna looked tired, older somehow. She'd cut her hair shorter. Wasn't wearing the engagement ring. I broke it off, she said before I could even sit down. 3 weeks ago. I sat down slowly. I'm sorry. Don't be, she said. I should have seen it sooner. After your article came out, after everything started falling apart, I started really paying attention to how Troy talked about you, about work, about everything. She looked down at her coffee cup. He was so angry. Not defensive, not hurt, just angry that he got caught. And the things he said about you, about other developers, about people he saw as beneath him. I realized I didn't know him at all. Yenna, I started. No, let me finish, she said. I chose him over you, over my own brother. I didn't even consider that you might be telling the truth. I just assumed you were being jealous or dramatic or whatever excuse was easiest. Tears were sliding down her cheeks. I'm so sorry, Harley. I should have believed you. I should have had your back. I reached across the table, took her hand. You believe me now. That matters. Does it? She asked. After everything? Yeah, I said. It does. We talked for 2 hours. Really talked, maybe for the first time in years. She told me about the red flags she'd ignored with Troy, the ways he'd been subtly controlling, the moments she'd felt uncomfortable but pushed aside. I told her about the fear and isolation I'd felt, about almost giving up. What you did took guts, she said. Going up against a whole corporation, risking everything. Wasn't sure I had a choice, I said. You did, Jenna said. You could have stayed quiet. Most people would have. When we left the coffee shop, she hugged me tight. I love you. I'm proud of you. And I'll be at your next product launch. Front row. I drove home feeling lighter than I had in months. The next day, my parents called, both of them on the line, which was unusual. Harley, my dad said, and his voice was different, softer. Can you come over this week? We'd like to talk. I went on Thursday evening. Walked into the house in Greenwich, feeling like I was entering foreign territory. They were waiting in the living room, sitting together on the couch. My mom had been crying. We owe you an apology, my dad said without preamble. A real one, not a polite one. My mom nodded, tissues clutched in her hand. We were wrong. About Troy. About your work. About you. We saw success as prestige, my dad continued. As fancy job titles and expensive cars and the right connections. We didn't see your actual talent, your vision, your courage. We compared you to Jenna constantly, my mom added. Made you feel like you were never enough. And when you tried to tell us the truth about Troy, we dismissed you. We chose appearances over our own son. They both looked older. Somehow. Smaller. I accept your apology, I said. But things have to change. I need you to respect my choices, even if you don't understand them, even if they don't fit your definition of success. We will, my dad promised. We'll do better. It wasn't perfect. Years of hurt don't heal in one conversation, but it was a start. Christmas Eve arrived cold and clear. I drove to my parents' house in Greenwich with a sense of cautious optimism I hadn't felt in years. The driveway was full of cars. The house lit up with warm yellow light spilling from every window. Inside, the energy was different, softer, more genuine. Jenna met me at the door, pulled me into a hug. Merry Christmas, big brother. Merry Christmas, I said. She'd brought someone, a guy named Patrick, who taught high school history. He was quiet and kind, made bad jokes that made Jenna laugh. The contrast to Troy was striking. Dinner was relaxed. My Aunt Susan asked about Streamline, actually listened to my answer. My dad wanted to know about scaling the business, offered thoughts about financial planning. My mom showed pictures of my office space to relatives, pride in her voice. Halfway through dessert, my dad asked everyone for their attention. I want to make a toast, he said, raising his wine glass. To Harley. For having the courage to stand up for himself, for building something meaningful, for teaching his old father what real success looks like. Glasses clinked. I felt my throat tighten. After dinner, my dad pulled me aside into his study, handed me an envelope. What's this? I asked. Open it. Inside was a check. $50,000. I stared at it, not understanding. It's an investment, my dad said. Not a gift. I want to invest in Streamline. I've looked at your numbers, talked to some people I know in tech. You're building something real, and I want to be part of it. Dad, I managed. I was wrong to dismiss you, he said, and his voice was rough. Wrong to measure you against Jenna. Wrong to value the wrong things. You had vision when I only saw risk. You had courage when I had doubt. He put his hand on my shoulder. You're the bravest person I know, son. And I'm sorry it took me so long to see it. We stood there in his study, surrounded by his law books and family photos, and I let myself feel it. The forgiveness, the validation, the love that had always been there but got buried under expectations and comparisons. "Thank you," I said. We rejoined the family, played board games, told stories, laughed without edge or tension. Around 11, I got ready to leave. Said my goodbyes, promised to come to dinner next week. Driving home through the empty streets, Christmas lights twinkling in every window, I thought about the past few months, how close I'd come to losing everything, how tempting it had been to stay quiet, to accept being dismissed, to let Troy and Vertex win. But I hadn't. I'd stood up. I'd fought back. And somehow, impossibly, I'd won. Not just the settlement or the funding or the successful product launch. Those were nice, but they weren't the real victory. The real victory was in my sister's apology, genuine and heartfelt, in my parents finally seeing me for who I actually was, in building something I believed in, regardless of whether anyone else understood it. I thought about all the other developers out there, working alone in apartments and coffee shops and co-working spaces, building dreams that might get stolen or dismissed or crushed by bigger companies with more resources. I hoped my story gave them courage, hoped they knew they could fight back. My phone buzzed with a text. "Lauren, the journalist who'd made all this possible, saw your dad's LinkedIn post about investing in Streamline. Congrats. Merry Christmas." I smiled, texted back, "Thanks for everything. Merry Christmas." Pulled up to my apartment, now just a place to sleep since I spent most of my time at the office. Went inside, made tea, sat by the window looking out at the city lights. Thought about that dinner in September, Troy's mocking laughter, my parents telling me to stop making a scene. Thought about how small I'd felt, how alone. But I hadn't been alone. Not really. There were people like Lauren looking for the truth. There were other developers who'd been through the same thing. There were customers who needed what I'd built. There was a whole community I hadn't known existed, waiting to support someone brave enough to stand up. Success, I'd learned, isn't about prestige or titles or impressing your family. It's not about competing with your siblings or proving you're good enough. Success is about believing in yourself when no one else does. It's about standing up for what's right even when it costs you everything. It's about understanding that your worth isn't determined by other people's expectations. Sometimes you have to lose everything to find out what actually matters. Sometimes you have to stand completely alone before you realize how many people are actually standing with you, even if you can't see them yet. And sometimes, when you stand up for yourself, you give other people permission to stand up too. That ripple effect, that inspiration, that courage passing from one person to another, that's worth more than any product launch or funding round or settlement check. That's the kind of success that lasts. That's the kind of victory that matters. I finished my tea, checked my email, 3 new customer signups for Streamline, 4 messages from small business owners asking questions, 1 inquiry from a potential partner interested in integration. Tomorrow I'd respond to all of them. Tomorrow I'd keep building, keep growing, keep proving that good ideas and honest work could win, even against bigger opponents. But tonight, I let myself feel grateful. Grateful for the hard lessons. Grateful for the people who'd stood by me. Grateful for the courage I'd found when I needed it most. Outside my window, the city sparkled with possibility. Inside, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. I want to ask you something. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself against someone more powerful, even when people you loved didn't believe you? How did you find the courage to keep going? Share your story in the comments below. I read every single one, and your experiences might inspire someone else who's facing their own battle right now. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think about what real success means or reminded you to stand up for what's right, please hit that like button. Subscribe to hear more stories about ordinary people facing extraordinary challenges. And share this with someone who needs to hear that they're not alone, that fighting back is possible, that justice isn't just for people with money and power. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being part of this community. And remember, your ideas matter, your work matters, and you matter. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Until next time, keep believing in yourself, keep fighting for what's right, and keep building the life you actually want, not the one other people expect you to live. Take care of yourselves out there.